Brother, when you remember, you feel alive. That's it. Yeah, I remember. Yeah, I've been sitting there.
There is a man in Arkansas who has never asked for your attention. He never hired a publicist. He never signed a record deal. He never walked out onto a stage with his name in lights, never performed in front of a screaming crowd, never wore a sequin jumpsuit or curled his lip for a camera. He is a Baptist preacher. He leads a congregation. He shows up on Sunday mornings and he does what he has always done. He opens his mouth and he sings. And that is where everything gets complicated. Because the moment that voice leaves his body and enters the air, something happens to the people who hear it. Not the polite, appreciative nod you give a talented singer at a church service. Something deeper. Something involuntary. Grown adults have gone still in their seats. People who hadn't thought about Elvis Presley in 20 years have felt something move through them that they couldn't immediately name. There have been people, documented, real people, who have heard this man sing and immediately started to cry. Not because the song was sad, but because the voice triggered a memory so specific, so intimate, so buried, that their bodies responded before their minds could catch up. His name is Bob Joyce, and for reasons that nobody has been able to fully explain, his voice does something that no vocal coach can teach, no impersonator has ever truly replicated, and no amount of training, imitation, or technical engineering has ever been able to manufacture from scratch. It sounds like Elvis Presley. Not like Elvis Presley in the way a tribute artist sounds like Elvis Presley. Not the surface impression, the accent, the phrasing, the familiar song choices arranged to maximize the resemblance. What people hear in Bob Joyce is something underneath all of that. Something structural. Something that lives in the actual architecture of the voice itself, the way it sits in the chest, the way it rises, the way it sustains a note and then releases it like it was never trying to hold on in the first place. It is a quality that the greatest vocal analysts in the world will tell you cannot be learned. It can only be inherited. And that word, inherited, is the word that changes everything. For years, Bob Joyce existed in a quiet corner of the world that the internet hadn't reached yet. He was a local man, known to his community, respected in his church, living the kind of life that most people would describe as modest and purposeful. Then someone did what people do now. They pulled out a phone. They recorded him singing, and they posted it. What happened next was not gradual. It was not slow. The moment that footage found its audience, it moved like fire through dry grass, shared, reshared, sent across continents to people who pressed play and then sat absolutely motionless for 3 minutes, trying to understand what they were hearing. The comments filled up fast. And they weren't the comments you'd expect on a Sunday church video. They were something else entirely. People writing in disbelief, people tagging friends, people saying, with varying degrees of seriousness and urgency, the same thing over and over: this is Elvis. Not his style, not his influence, him. Now, before you decide what you believe about that, just hold it. Because this video isn't asking you to make up your mind in the first 60 seconds. What this video is going to do is take you through something that goes far beyond the gut reaction, far beyond the emotional impression, far beyond the comment section of a viral church clip. What you're going to hear today is a side-by-side audio comparison that has been put together with a level of detail and specificity that no previous version of this conversation has ever reached. And when you hear it, really hear it, with everything laid out next to everything, the question stops being, do they sound alike? The question becomes something much harder to sit with. Audio comparisons between Bob Joyce and Elvis Presley have existed online for years. Most of them are informal, passionate, but unstructured. They capture the feeling without fully capturing the why. What makes this different, what makes today different, is that this analysis goes into the specific, measurable biological characteristics of both voices in a way that forces you to confront something the casual listener would miss entirely: the vibrato, the resonance points, the break, the sustain, the consonant behavior at the edges of syllables. These are not impressionistic observations. These are the fingerprints of a voice. And fingerprints, by definition, are not supposed to match between two different people. By the time this video is over, you will have heard something that does not have a comfortable explanation. You will have sat with evidence that the people closest to it, the analysts, the musicians, the scholars who have devoted years to understanding Elvis Presley's voice, have struggled to process out loud. And you are going to have to make a decision, in the quiet place inside yourself where you keep the things you actually believe about what it means. But first, you need to understand exactly what the audio reveals. Because once you hear it broken down, piece by piece, note by note, nothing about this story sounds simple anymore. There is a difference between sounding like someone and being vocally identical to someone. Most people have never had to think about that distinction before, because most of the time, it doesn't matter. A voice is a voice. A song is a song. You either enjoy it or you don't. But when you place two voices side by side, not their performances, not their song choices, not the emotion they choose to perform, but the raw, unfiltered biological mechanics of how each voice is produced, the distinction stops being philosophical. It becomes forensic. And forensic comparisons don't care about your feelings. They only care about what's there. So let's talk about what's there. The first thing that analysts noticed, and this is not a small thing, is the vibrato. Every singer has a vibrato. It's the natural oscillation of the voice on a sustained note, the slight wavering that gives a held sound its warmth and depth. But vibrato is not universal. It varies between singers in speed, in width, in consistency, and in what musicians call depth of origin, meaning where in the body the vibrato is being generated from. Most trained singers develop a vibrato that originates relatively high, in the throat or upper chest. It can be beautiful, it can be technically perfect, but it has a ceiling. Elvis Presley's vibrato was different. It came from somewhere lower, deeper. It had a slower oscillation rate than most comparably trained voices, and it carried a width, a breadth, that gave it an almost physical presence in the air. You didn't just hear it, you felt it land. Bob Joyce's vibrato is, by measurable standard, operating in the same register, the same oscillation rate, the same depth of origin, the same width. When the two voices are placed on an audio track simultaneously, when you strip away the decades, the different songs, the different decades of recording technology, the vibrato patterns move together like they were produced by the same instrument. That alone would be remarkable. But it doesn't stop there. The second characteristic is what vocal scientists refer to as the chest-to-head break point, the precise moment in a singer's range where the voice transitions from its lower chest register to its upper head register. Every voice has this break. The location of it, the smoothness of it, the way a singer navigates it, these things are as individual as a fingerprint. Elvis Presley's breakpoint sat in an uncommon location. It was lower than most male voices of comparable range, meaning he could sustain his chest register, that deep, warm, authoritative tone, further up the scale than most singers could without straining. And when he crossed that break, he did it with a particular softness, almost like a door being closed very gently rather than opened. It wasn't a technical choice he made. It was simply what his voice did. Bob Joyce's breakpoint falls in the same location, and he crosses it the same way. More than 90% of the people watching this video right now still aren't subscribed, and that means most people are missing out on exclusive, untold stories about Elvis Presley you won't find anywhere else. If you don't want to miss the next revelation, now's the time. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video with one friend. Now let's continue. The third element is harder to quantify but impossible to ignore once you've heard it, and that is the natural sustain on held notes. There is a quality in certain voices where, when they hold a note at full resonance, the sound doesn't just hang in the air, it seems to expand slightly before it releases, as though the voice has one final thing to say before it lets go. It is not a technique. Vocal coaches do not teach it. It emerges from a specific combination of lung capacity, laryngeal positioning, and something that researchers simply call resonant shape, the literal physical architecture of the throat, mouth, and nasal cavity working together in a way that is genetically determined. Elvis Presley had it. It was one of the things that made his voice feel so enormous even on a quiet song, even on a gentle ballad where he was barely pushing above a whisper. When Bob Joyce holds a note, when he reaches the peak of a phrase and lets the sound carry, he does the same thing. The same expansion, the same release, the same sense that the voice has weight behind it that doesn't come from effort. Now, any single one of these characteristics, taken alone, could be explained away. Voices share traits. Coincidences exist. The world is full of gifted singers, and occasionally two gifted singers will share a quality or two. That is not a story. But when you layer these characteristics on top of each other, when you put the vibrato against the vibrato, the breakpoint against the breakpoint, the sustain against the sustain, and every single data point lands in the same place, the explanation of coincidence starts to buckle under its own weight. There is a musician, a man with decades of professional experience in audio analysis, who sat with this comparison for the better part of an afternoon. And when he finally spoke, he didn't offer a theory. He didn't draw a conclusion. He said something much simpler and much more unsettling. He said, "I've spent my entire career learning how voices work. And I don't have a framework for this. That is not the reaction of a man who heard two singers who sounded similar. That is the reaction of a man who heard something he couldn't explain." And the voice, as extraordinary as it is, turns out to be only the beginning of this story. More than 90% of the people watching this video right now still aren't subscribed, and that means most people are missing out on exclusive, untold stories about Elvis Presley you won't find anywhere else. If you don't want to miss the next revelation, now's the time. Subscribe, hit the bell, and share this video with one friend. Now let's continue. Here is what makes this story different from every other voice comparison you have ever seen on this platform. Every other version of this conversation starts and ends with the audio. People hear the resemblance, they react to the resemblance, and then the conversation circles back on itself until it runs out of energy and dissolves into the comment section. But the audio is not the whole story. It never was. Because underneath the voice, underneath the vibrato and the breakpoint and the sustain, there is a human being. And the human being, when you look at him closely, raises questions that the audio alone could never fully articulate. Bob Joyce is a pastor. That is not a peripheral detail. That is the center of everything. Think about what that means for a moment. In a world where the internet will find you, where algorithms will surface you, where the machinery of modern attention will pull anyone with an extraordinary talent into its orbit whether they want it or not, Bob Joyce chose a church, not as a stepping stone, not as a quiet beginning before something louder, as a destination, as a life. For decades, while the world was busy constructing the mythology of Elvis Presley, the commemorations, the tribute concerts, the Hollywood films, the estate licensing deals, the endless cultural conversation about what Elvis meant and what Elvis left behind, Bob Joyce was in Benton, Arkansas, leading a congregation through Sunday worship, quietly, consistently, without a publicist, without a manager, without a single move that suggested a man who understood the commercial value of what lived inside his own voice. And that restraint, that profound, almost architectural quietness, is something that deserves far more attention than it has received. Because here is the thing about talented people. Talented people, as a rule, do not hide. They may be humble, they may be modest, they may resist the most extreme expressions of fame, but they do not, as a general pattern, spend 40 years in complete commercial silence when they possess something as rare and as marketable as the voice Bob Joyce carries. The music industry is not a subtle machine. It finds voices like his. It has scouts, it has pipelines, it has 1,000 different roads that lead from a gifted singer in a small town to a recording contract in Nashville. And yet none of those roads ever seem to reach Bob Joyce. Or perhaps more accurately, Bob Joyce never seemed to reach for any of them. Why? That is not a rhetorical question. It is the question that sits at the heart of everything. The question that the people who have followed this story most closely keep returning to, because it does not have a satisfying answer. A man with that voice, in this culture, at any point in the last 4 decades, could have had a career. That is the silence Bob Joyce maintained for years, while the internet built an entire cathedral of theory and speculation around his voice, his face, and his very existence. And when that silence finally cracked, when he finally addressed the comparisons that had followed him through years of ministry and viral notoriety, the world leaned in expecting one thing and received something else entirely. What most people expected was a wall, a firm, unambiguous, slightly exasperated denial from a man of faith who had grown tired of being confused with a dead rock and roll legend. They expected the pastoral equivalent of a cease and desist, a clear, dignified statement that separated him from the mythology once and for all and allowed everyone involved to move on with their lives. That is what the rational arc of the story seemed to demand. And in a simpler version of this story, that is exactly what would have happened. But Bob Joyce is not a simple man, and this has never been a simple story. When Joyce addressed the comparisons, he did so with the same measured, unhurried quality that characterizes everything about his public presence. He acknowledged the attention. He acknowledged that people had noticed the similarities, and that the videos comparing his voice to Elvis had reached an audience far beyond anything he could have anticipated or controlled. He spoke about it with a kind of gentle bemusement, the way a man might discuss an unexpected storm that passed through his town, something that happened to him rather than something he had any hand in creating. And on the surface, reading those words quickly, it could sound like a denial. It could sound like a man calmly stepping back from a story that doesn't belong to him. But listen more carefully. Read more slowly. Because what Bob Joyce said and what Bob Joyce did not say are two very different things, and the gap between them is where this story continues to live. He did not say the comparisons were absurd. He did not express the kind of genuine bewilderment that a person typically expresses when they are being associated with something that has absolutely no basis in reality. He did not laugh it off the way an innocent man with nothing complicated to carry usually laughs things off. The tone was not defensive, which one might expect, but it was also not fully dismissive in the way that a clean conscience usually produces clean dismissals. It was careful, layered. The words of a man who had thought very deliberately about exactly how much to say and had chosen with equal deliberateness to stop just short of saying all of it. And the people who had followed this story the longest noticed. They always notice. On one side of the debate, there were those who took his statement at face value and felt the matter was settled. They argued that a pastor, a man whose entire life is built on honesty and integrity and standing before his congregation as a vessel of truth, would not lie about something this significant. They argued that his willingness to address it at all was itself a form of courage, and that reading darkness into a measured response was the kind of motivated reasoning that conspiracy thinking always produces. A real one, a significant one. The door was not closed to him. The door was standing wide open, and he walked past it every single Sunday on his way to the pulpit. Now consider the timeline. Consider the geography. Consider the strange and specific overlap between the moment one man's public story came to its sudden and shocking end and the moment another man's quiet, faithful, unremarkable life was already underway. These are not accusations. They are observations. They are the kinds of observations that responsible people make when they are trying to understand something that does not fit neatly into the available categories. And what makes them worth making is not that they prove anything, it is that they persist. Year after year, as the Elvis conversation evolves and shifts and finds new entry points, the name Bob Joyce keeps surfacing. Not because the internet manufactured the connection, but because something about the connection refuses to go away on its own. There are people who have attended Bob Joyce's church, people who have sat in those pews, heard him sing week after week, and made their own private calculations about what they were experiencing. Most of them have never spoken publicly about it. That silence, too, is interesting. Not suspicious, but interesting. Because in a world where everyone has an opinion and a platform, the people closest to Bob Joyce have chosen, almost unanimously, to let him be what he says he is, their pastor, their community leader, a man of faith doing the work he was called to do. And maybe that is exactly what he is. Maybe the voice is a coincidence of the most staggering kind, a genetic lottery that landed twice in the same century and produced two instruments so similar that even trained professionals cannot find the seam between them. Maybe Bob Joyce is simply a gifted man who found his purpose in a church in Arkansas and never needed anything more than that. But here's what stays with you. Long after the audio comparison fades, long after the debate quiets down, long after you've made your peace with whatever conclusion feels most comfortable. Every single Sunday, Bob Joyce stands at that pulpit. He opens the hymnal. He breathes in, and then that voice, that impossible, inexplicable, world-stopping voice, fills the room again. And somewhere in the back of your mind, without your permission, a question forms. Does he know? Not whether the congregation suspects, not whether the internet is watching, but does he know, in the deepest, most private chamber of himself, exactly whose voice he is carrying? And has he chosen, every single Sunday for 40 years, to sing anyway? Because if that is true, then the voice was never really hidden. It was just waiting for someone to finally listen. Let's be honest with each other for a moment. Because this story deserves honesty more than it deserves drama, and the people who have followed it longest know the difference between the two. This video cannot prove that Bob Joyce is Elvis Presley. No YouTube video can. No audio comparison, however detailed, however precise, however forensically rigorous, carries the legal or scientific weight required to make that determination in any official capacity. And if you came here expecting a confession, a document, a smoking gun that closes the case once and for all, that is not what today is. That has never been what any day in this conversation has been. And pretending otherwise would be the fastest way to dishonor something that is genuinely, legitimately worth taking seriously. But here's where honesty cuts in the other direction too. The inability to prove something is not the same as the absence of something worth proving. And the fact that this question has never been settled, not definitively, not convincingly, not in a way that made the people asking it put it down and walk away, is itself one of the most remarkable features of the entire story. Elvis Presley is not an obscure figure. He is not a footnote. He is one of the most exhaustively documented human beings of the 20th century. Thousands of hours of footage, hundreds of thousands of photographs, medical records, dental records, legal filings, tax returns, family testimonies, eyewitness accounts, stretching across 3 decades of public life. The infrastructure of documentation that surrounds Elvis Presley is so vast, so layered, so deeply embedded in the official record that it should, by every reasonable standard, make any serious question about the circumstances of his death almost impossible to sustain. And yet here we are, nearly 50 years later, and the question has not died. Think about what that actually means. Not as a conspiracy, not as a fantasy, but as a sociological fact. 50 years of access to information, 50 years of people motivated to find the truth, 50 years of journalism and research, an internet investigation, and the question of whether Elvis Presley truly left this world on August 16th, 1977, remains genuinely, stubbornly, uncomfortably open in the minds of millions of people around the world. That is not what happens when the answer is obvious. That is what happens when something underneath the official story doesn't quite hold its shape under pressure. And into that 50-year silence, Bob Joyce's voice keeps arriving. Every Sunday. Unannounced, uninvited by the conversation, and yet perfectly placed inside it. Now consider what a definitive vocal forensic analysis would actually require. Not a side-by-side comparison made by passionate researchers working from publicly available recordings, but a true, commissioned, authoritative scientific analysis conducted by professionals with access to original master recordings, advanced spectral imaging technology, and the kind of institutional credibility that makes a finding mean something beyond the comment section of a YouTube video. That analysis has never been done. Not by Elvis Presley Enterprises, not by any major music publication, not by any academic institution with the resources and the reach to make it matter. The technology exists. The recordings exist. The question exists loudly enough to justify the effort. And yet, silence, no commission, no study, no official attempt to put the comparison to rest with the kind of evidence that would actually settle it. Ask yourself why. Not as a rhetorical exercise, genuinely. If the comparison is meaningless, if Bob Joyce is simply a gifted singer with a remarkable coincidental resemblance, and the whole conversation is a harmless curiosity that serious people should politely ignore, then the cost of proving that is almost nothing. A proper analysis would take weeks. It would produce a clear result. It would end the conversation permanently. And yet, nobody with the authority and the resources to commission it has ever done so. The absence of that denial is not proof of anything, but it is, as it has always been, profoundly interesting. What this story is really about, underneath the audio, underneath the timeline, underneath the questions that keep refusing to resolve, is legacy. It is about what it means for a voice of that magnitude to persist in the world. Elvis Presley's voice was not just a cultural product. It was a living thing. It moved people in ways that bypassed language and logic and landed somewhere older and deeper than either. It made people feel seen and known and understood in that specific way that only music can achieve. And when that voice disappeared from the world, when August 16th, 1977 became the date on the stone, something went out of the culture that has never fully been replaced. And then a preacher in Arkansas opened his mouth. And the sound came back. Whatever you believe about Bob Joyce, whatever conclusion your reason and your instinct arrive at together when you weigh everything you've heard today, that moment of return is real. The effect is real. The reaction in the bodies of the people who hear him is real. And the side-by-side audio comparison that brought you to this video today is real in the most specific, measurable, undeniable sense. Two voices, operating by the same internal logic, shaped by the same invisible architecture, carrying the same frequency into the same air. Go back and listen one more time. Not for the resemblance. You already heard that. Listen this time for what lives underneath the resemblance. Listen for the thing that doesn't have a name yet. The quality that made one analyst go quiet, that made grown adults cry in a church pew, that has kept this conversation alive for decades when every other Elvis theory has long since faded. Listen for whatever it is that refuses to be explained, because that, right there, is where the truth is hiding. If this comparison left you with more questions than answers, that means you're paying attention. Drop your reaction in the comments right now. Share this video with someone who loved Elvis. Subscribe for what comes next. Because this story has been quiet for 50 years, and it is just now starting to speak.